before he became a pillar of faith, before his name echoed through history, before churches were built on his confession. There was a moment, a single moment, when a grown man stared at a fire in the dark and lied about knowing God. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And the shocking truth is this: the man who denied Jesus Christ was the very man Jesus once called the rock on which everything would stand. So how does a coward become unbreakable? How does fear turn into fire? And what happens in the space between failure and destiny? Because here's the thing: if God could rebuild him, he might be rewriting your story too. Pause. The wind off the Sea of Galilee carried the smell of fish and sweat and long nights of work. Nets scraped against wood. Hands were cracked, hearts were hardened, and faith was something people whispered about, not something they trusted. This was the world Simon, son of Jonah, knew. A fisherman's life. Predictable. Brutal. Honest in its danger. You woke up knowing the sea could kill you, and you went out anyway. Simon wasn't searching for destiny. He was searching for tomorrow's catch. Then one morning, everything broke open. A stranger stepped into his boat, not with armor, not with power, not with money, but with authority that didn't need explanation. When Jesus told him to cast the nets again, Simon wanted to argue. He was tired. He was experienced. He knew better. And yet, he obeyed. The nets strained. The water churned. Fish flooded in like the sea itself had decided to give up its secrets. Boats nearly sank. Partners shouted. And in that chaos, Simon fell to his knees. "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." That confession matters more than most people realize. Because courage doesn't begin with confidence. It begins with honesty. Jesus didn't step back. He stepped closer. Do not be afraid. From now on, you will catch men. And just like that, fear was no longer Simon's enemy. It was his calling. Jesus renamed him Peter, Petros, rock. Not because he was strong, but because he would learn to stand after being shattered. And Peter followed, impulsive, loud, brave one moment, terrified the next. The kind of man who jumped before thinking. The kind of man who loved fiercely and failed publicly. Here's something that rarely gets said. Peter walked on water. But only long enough to realize he couldn't. And when he sank, it wasn't the storm that terrified him most. It was the realization that faith doesn't erase fear, it exposes it. Jesus grabbed him anyway. Night after night, Peter watched miracles unfold. Blind eyes opened. Storms silenced. Demons fled. Dead men breathed again. And each miracle whispered the same question into Peter's soul. What if this is all taken away? So when Jesus spoke of suffering, of death, of a cross, Peter snapped. Never, Lord. This will never happen to you. It sounded brave. It felt loyal. But fear was already tightening its grip. Jesus' response cut deeper than any blade. Get behind me, Satan. Because fear, when it pretends to be faith, becomes dangerous. Still, Peter stayed close. Closer than most. When Jesus asked the question that echoes through eternity, "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered with fire, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And in that moment, heaven answered back, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." Think about that. The promise was spoken before the failure. Grace always arrives early. Then came the night that broke him. The garden was heavy with prayer. Torches flickered. Soldiers marched. A kiss betrayed the Son of God. And Peter, shaking, did the only brave thing he knew how to do: he swung a sword. Violence felt easier than faith. Jesus stopped him. And as the chains closed, so did Peter's courage. He followed at a distance. Close enough to see. Far enough to escape. A fire burned in the courtyard. Shadows danced. Accusations whispered. And one question, simple, almost casual, struck harder than the arrest itself. "You were with him." Peter laughed it off. Another voice. Another look. Another chance to stand. "I don't know him." Then a third time. And somewhere in the darkness, a rooster cried. Jesus turned. No anger. No accusation. Just truth. And Peter broke. He didn't just fail God. He failed the version of himself he thought was strong. Here's the terrifying part. Jesus didn't chase him that night. Silence followed the cross. Despair followed the tomb. And Peter ran, back to fishing, back to the sea, back to who he used to be. Because when hope hurts too much, we retreat to what feels familiar. But resurrection has a way of hunting people down. At dawn, a stranger stood on the shore. A fire burned again. Fish filled nets again. And Jesus spoke Peter's name, not as an accuser, but as a restorer. "Do you love me?" Once. Twice. 3 times. Each question mending a denial. Each answer rebuilding a soul. And here's the shock no one expects. Jesus didn't erase Peter's failure. He transformed it into authority. Weeks later, the man who once trembled before servants stood before thousands. His voice didn't shake. His message didn't bend. And when the Spirit fell at Pentecost, Peter, the coward, became the catalyst. The rock didn't rise because he never fell. He rose because he let God rebuild him where he shattered. And in Rome, years later, when death finally came for him, Peter asked for one last mercy, not to die like his Lord, but upside down, because he said he wasn't worthy. That is not the end of a coward. That is the birth of unbreakable faith. Pause. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever failed loudly, feared deeply, or wondered whether God could still use you, listen carefully. Your denial is not your destiny. Your fear is not your future. And your lowest moment might be the place God begins His greatest work. If this story spoke to your heart, please like this video, it helps the message travel. Share it with someone who needs hope tonight. And subscribe to Parables of Hope, because your support gives us strength to keep telling stories that awaken faith across the world. Go back and watch our previous videos. Let these parables rebuild you. And remember, God doesn't choose the fearless. He transforms the willing. Stay rooted. Stay hopeful. And until next time, let hope speak. Before we move forward, let the silence linger for just a breath. Because what happens after restoration is where most stories lose people. But Peter's story, this is where it becomes dangerous, in the best possible way. The days after resurrection were not loud. They were quiet, confusing, heavy with unanswered questions. Jesus appeared, disappeared, spoke in riddles, breathed peace, and then, just like that, ascended. And suddenly the disciples were left staring at the sky, holding promises they didn't yet understand. Peter stood among them, restored, but still human. Forgiven, but not yet fearless. Here's the part people often miss. Restoration does not instantly remove fear. It gives you permission to face it. So Peter waited. Like he was told. In an upper room that smelled of sweat, oil lamps, and anticipation. Doors locked. Hearts racing. Every footstep outside sounded like danger. Rome was still powerful. The religious leaders were still angry. And the memory of a cross still burned behind their eyes. Then the sound came. Not a whisper. Not a feeling. A roar. Like wind tearing through the soul. Fire didn't burn the room, it crowned it. Tongues of flame rested on ordinary men, and something ancient woke up inside Peter. Not confidence. Conviction. The kind that doesn't shout to prove itself. The kind that speaks because silence is no longer possible. When he stepped outside, Jerusalem was crowded. Pilgrims. Skeptics. Mockers. The same city that had screamed for blood now watched a fisherman take a breath that would change history. And here's what should shock you. Peter didn't start with miracles. He didn't start with threats. He didn't even start with hope. He started with truth. You crucified him. No trembling. No apology. This is the same man who once folded under a servant girl's question. And now thousands stood listening, cut to the heart, not because Peter became eloquent, but because fear no longer owned him. That day, 3,000 lives shifted direction. Notice the reversal. 3 denials. 3,000 conversions. God wastes nothing. From that moment on, Peter's shadow carried weight. Not magic, authority. People listened when he spoke because he had been broken where they were broken. He healed not from a pedestal, but from a scar. And still, danger followed. Prisons. Beatings. Threats. Commands to stay silent. Once, after being arrested and warned never to speak again, Peter walked out bruised and smiling. Not because pain felt good, but because purpose finally felt clear. Here's something unsettling and beautiful. The man who once tried to save Jesus from the cross now understood that crosses are not failures. They are doorways. Years passed. Churches formed. Letters traveled. Faith spread across borders and bloodlines. And Peter, once impulsive, once unstable, became steady. Not flawless. Steady. The kind of leader who wept with the weak and stood firm when power demanded compromise. Then came Rome. The empire didn't fear armies the way it feared ideas. And Christianity was no longer a whisper. It was a wildfire. Leaders were targeted. Executions became warnings. And when they came for Peter, history says he tried to run. Yes, run. Even at the end, the old instinct flared. But according to early tradition, on the road out of the city, Peter saw a vision, Jesus walking toward Rome. "Lord, where are you going?" "To be crucified again." And Peter understood. "Fear not." Purpose answered. He turned around. When they sentenced him to death, Peter made one final request, not dramatic, not defiant, just honest. "Crucify me upside down, because I am not worthy to die like my Lord." Think about that. The man who once denied knowing Jesus could no longer imagine living without him. That is the full arc. Not coward to hero. Not weak to strong. But afraid to faithful. And here's where this story reaches you. Because maybe your fear doesn't look like denial out of fire. Maybe it looks like silence when you should speak. Compromise when you should stand. Running back to what's familiar because believing feels risky. Listen. I'm serious. If God can turn a broken fisherman into a foundation that shook empires, then your worst moment is not the end of your story. It might be the place where God begins doing his deepest work. Peter was not chosen because he was brave. He became brave because he stayed close after he failed. So if this story stirred something in you, don't scroll away. Sit with it. Let it work on you. And if this message meant something, help us carry it further. Like this video so the algorithm doesn't bury hope. Share it with someone who's struggling in silence. And subscribe to Parables of Hope, because your support, yes, yours, is what allows us to keep creating stories that restore faith across the world. Go back and watch our earlier videos. Let these parables shape you, strengthen you, remind you who God still calls. And remember this, as you go. God does not build his kingdom on perfect people. He builds it on surrendered hearts. Stay faithful. Stay hopeful. And may peace walk with you, even when fear whispers. Until next time. If you're still here, it's not by accident. Something in Peter's story reached into something unfinished inside you. Because maybe you didn't deny Jesus with words. Maybe you denied your calling with silence. Maybe you didn't run from a cross. Maybe you ran from a conversation, a prayer, a step of faith you knew you should take. And here's the quiet truth no one says out loud. Jesus never looked away from Peter. Not at the fire. Not at the denial. Not at the rooster's cry. That same look, the one filled with mercy instead of shame, is still being given today. So if you feel unworthy, if you feel broken, if you feel like you waited too long or failed too loudly, listen. I mean this. God is not finished with you. The stone that crushed Peter became the stone that steadied him. The fear that silenced him became the fire that sent him. And the cross that terrified him became the door he willingly walked through. Your story is not defined by the moment you fell apart. It is defined by the moment you choose to turn back. So before this video ends, before you scroll, before the noise returns, take one breath. And in that breath, remember this. Grace did not give up on Peter. Grace does not give up on you. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. It helps this message reach souls who are hurting quietly. Share it with someone who needs hope tonight. And subscribe to Parables of Hope, because your support, your presence, gives us strength to keep sharing stories that heal, restore, and awaken faith across the world. Go and watch our previous videos. Walk through these parables with us. Grow with us. And if you ever doubt your worth, remember this final truth. God doesn't call the fearless. He calls the willing. And then He makes them unshakable. May peace guard your heart. May courage rise in your spirit. And may you walk forward knowing you are still called. You are still loved. And your story is still being written. Amen.